I was asking you before the break if you have seen that documentary that involved the kids from Nickelodeon and the possible molestation.
No, we had talked about it, and I know that Drake Bell was like a big part of it, right? That he was revealing some stuff. And
So tonight is part 2.
Okay.
And it's the Drake Bell. It's on the ID channel, which I don't know what that is or who owns it or whatever, but it's okay.
It was, Discovery.
Okay, so it's
Discovery.
okay. But the way they set up tonight's is going to be really good. And they were like, and then finally a star came forward and said something, and they were asking the people that they were interviewing, they're like, on one of our shows? Not one of our shows. And they were like, yes. And they go, was it somebody that we knew, like an actor? And they were like, yes. Like they were revealing it to the rest of the crew. And then at the end, you just see Drake come walking out and sit down, and then they ended it, and it comes up tonight.
That's great.
But I have to tell you, so all this stuff came out about Corey Feldman and Corey Haim, and they had all these drug problems, and things were bad, and they were tying all these pedophile rings in Hollywood and all that. And I thought, I'm so glad that my kid's not into this stuff, because I tried to push him that way a little bit, because I had a good-looking kid. He did some modeling and stuff, and I was like, you can make so much money, this would be great. But once I started seeing that stuff, I was like, no, you're good here. You know, I'm not going to push it anymore.
Joey Lawrence, who was on Blossom and a bunch of different stuff, him and his brothers act as well. Were any of them on there at all?
No. So I'm going to tell you who was, and you'll know.
Well, real quick, one of his brothers, I just read a quote that he said that he had been propositioned quite a few times for different roles. And he goes, literally, like, you'll be in the next Marvel movie if you do this. He said when he was younger.
That kid's name was Matt Rife.
He said when he was younger, he had to go to one of the executives' hotel room, and the guy came out in a robe and asked him to take his clothes off so he could take some Polaroids and stuff. He left, told his agency. His agency fired him because it didn't go along with it.
Really?
Yeah.
That is crazy.
Jesus.
There's so many. There's so many people involved in it, and like you can't really speak out against it because there's so many people, and especially higher ups, that if you do, you're basically blackballed from the industry, and then on top of that, you're a child and they're adults, and they're not going to take your word over theirs.
So, what would be a reason for you not to come forward, Carmen, if you were a parent?
If I was again, as a parent, I'm not, but like they're probably looking at it as I don't want my kid's career to be blacklisted.
So you're pretty close. So you're close to what these people were saying yesterday. So the whole thing on the first part of it centers around Dan Snyder, who had his first hit on TV with Head of the Class, which is a show that came out in the 80s, and it was him and some other high school kids and Howard Hessman, who had been famous from WKRP in Cincinnati. I was their teacher, and he was kind of like an old stoner. And I remember the show, but I don't really remember the show. And Dan Snyder created that show. He wrote it with one of the other guys, and so he got a little bit of clout in Hollywood. Then he goes over to Nickelodeon, and he creates shows on Nickelodeon. He does a sketch show. I think it was All That was what it was called.
With Amanda Bynes.
Well, no, but this is before that.
Was that you can't do that on television?
No, it was called All That, but it was similar to that. You can't do it on television. He said they showed interviews, and it was the first sketch comedy show for kids. So Dan Snyder now goes down as the producer of that and the co-creator of that. So he's getting more and more clout. But the problem is that I had heard Dan. He's a big fat guy, and I always heard that he was the problem. He was the molester. And then you get like the iCarly stories that came out, the things that they would say about him. But watching this documentary last night, he was harmless compared to some of the other people that are there. He didn't seem like he was into kids. He seemed to me like a fat guy who never got any attention from girls. And once he started getting some attention from these young kids, he wanted that, and he wanted to be in control. They had one woman who was the only woman on a writing staff. Like he would make women do things that were very demoralizing. He had woman was bent over a counter pitching an idea, and he said, "Wouldn't it be great if you pitched it like you were getting sodomized while you were doing it?" And she was like, "No," and he was like, "Come on, just do it." And the woman that was in the room said they forced her to do it by keep telling her, "Do it," you know, and they showed a pattern that if you went against him and against the grain, whether you were a kid or a writer or a producer or something, you slowly got pushed out. So that is where his problems were. So I always assumed he was the molester, but evidently he wasn't. He was just a control freak and somebody who was putting these kids in awkward semi-sexual situations. They had a guy on the show that they called Mr. Pickle. And it was a recurring thing where he would just show up with a tray of pickles.
Doesn't sound
but
good.
then he'd be giving people pickles. And one of the things, what their point was, there's this sexual adult humor that's being snuck into this, and they were cheering it almost like we got one over on them. So one of the examples was Mr. Pickles shows up to give Ray Romano food because he's starving, because they got a lot of guest hosts on the show. And he came in and he passed Ray Romano a pickle through a hole that was cut in the wall. And then Ray Romano grabbed it with both hands and was eating the pickle.
Oh no! Everybody loves Raymond.
And everybody, but the thing was that Ray's point of view is he's starving and he's eating a pickle because it's a gag on the show where the pickle guy comes around with pickles. But they were all innuendos. And then they had another thing where the kids, they were mixing, I think it was coffee, straight into their mouth. So they would pull a thing and coffee would come out of their mouth. Then they'd run over and pull another thing, and sugar would go in their mouth, and they go back and forth. And at the end, the sugar would coagulate and just be stuck all over their faces. And they were having like several kind of facial innuendos that they were showing. And it was really kind of gross watching it and listening to them.
And knowing what is happening, because like back in the day, you're just thinking they're just doing dumb little stunts.
But I don't think any of it was that bad until they pointed it all out. Like they kept, like the people were saying, the adults were saying, well, they're making the kids do this stuff, and aren't they seeing? But then again, in my mind, I'm like, also this is dumb stuff that kids do. I have a kid; she's constantly in the kitchen with trying to make concoctions and stuff, and like I don't know. But that Mr. Pickle guy ended up being the molester.
Oh.
Who would have thought, Mr. Pickle?
Yeah.
Mr. Pickle was one of the least obvious ones on the set because he like betrayed their trust the most because everybody loved Mr. Pickles. He took care of the kids. I
bet he did.
You're right, but that was the thing. I don't know if it was any of the kids that he worked with that were molested, because what happens is, this is how they ended the show yesterday. They had a team in the room with their parents, and they asked their parents to leave the room, which they did sometimes to go through run-throughs and stuff. And a group of people came in, and they said, hey, Mr. Pickle, whatever his real name was, he was arrested last night for molesting kids and doing stuff to kids. Did he do anything to any of you kids? And the kids were being interviewed now as adults, and they were like, it was one of the most uncomfortable things you could ever imagine, because it didn't happen to me, but I'm looking around the other room to see if it happened to anybody else, and are they going to say anything? We don't know.
Plus, they all love Mr. Pickles.
And that's why they were all like, not Mr. Pickles. We love Mr. Pickles.
Yeah.
So it ends where he goes, and we looked around the room, and nobody said anything. And then they said, did that mean Mr. Pickles had not molested those kids, or are they too afraid to say anything?
Right.
And then they were like, would anybody come forward? And that's when they showed Drake come in and sit down.
Yeah.
So
yeah, but real quick, by the way, if you're asking a group of kids if they got molested, maybe do it one at a time.
Yeah.
Well, that was the whole
You
point.
know what I mean?
That was the point, was that it was lawyers who were asking them so that they could put him in that position with no parents. So they say no, and they say, we did our investigation.
So they're trying to
Did it
protect
happen
the
here?
thing as well, yeah.
Because they don't want it to come back on, because it's going to come back on Nickelodeon.
That was the number one crime to me, was that they kept covering it
You
up.
got to protect the brand.
Protect the brand for sure. So they showed one woman who was fired. They knocked it all down to there was only one woman writer left, and then they embarrassed her so much that she ended up quitting. And she went and filed a lawsuit against them, and they quickly settled and just let it go away. Like, they didn't want to have anything to do with it. So, but it gets worse. One of the guys they show, the first guy that they show, is this guy who is a PA on the set, and he is also the wrangler of the kids. He's in his late 20s, early 30s. Real handsome guy.
If you tell me he's Mr. Cucumber,
No.
I'm going to be like,
He had no on-air thing. He was a behind-the-scenes
Yeah.
production assistant, but he was the liaison between the kids and the production, and was
right.
tight with all the parents.
So these kids probably trust him as well.
But so did the parents,
Yeah.
because these were little kids. So they get this girl, Brandy, and she has a relationship with him, and like she's 7 at the time or 8 at the time, and they have developed this relationship over the years of her and the parent and this guy being around, and it got they were so comfortable with him, the parents, that when he left or the show broke, whatever, he said, "Can I get your email?" And we'll exchange emails. So the mother gave the girl's email, and she said she would get online and she'd go, "Oh, I got an email from this guy and James," and she would get excited. And the mother said she would look at it and it would be like, "How are you? I'm working on this project. What are you working on?" Real benign. He said, and one day I saw her go to her computer, and she shut her computer down and she pushed it away and she ran in her room and slammed the door. He's like, and I knew something had happened. And I went in there and she said, "What happened?" And she said, "James sent me a picture of himself fully naked, masturbating."
Oh.
And he said, "This is what I do when I think about you."
Oh.
Oh.
All right.
But it gets worse.
Oh.
They launched his investigation into this guy, and this guy, who looked like the all-American boy, he looked like Scotty from Hot. He just looked like a happy young guy who
Sounds right.
showed no signs of anything.
Oh.
They went to his house, and he was keeping diaries, and he was referring to himself as a pedophile and saying, "I know I'm a pedophile," and he would talk about ways that we would have to rape young girls if he could.
Jesus.
He documented it all, and he had Ziploc bags, and in each Ziploc bag was some token of one of these kids.
Trophies, yeah.
And they were like, and the reason why they were able to track it back to this Brandy girl, this 10-year-old that he had sent the nude picture to, is because she had a Ziploc bag. He had something for her.
Oh.
But they were showing the mother, and I felt terrible for the mother because at first I wanted to punch the mother in the face because she said right at that point when she told him to send the picture, she didn't call the cops. And she said the reason why she didn't call the cops was what Carmen said, partly because she figured she would ruin the rest of her career, but also she was like, I couldn't get over the fact that we liked this guy so much, and that he thought that she thought that the cops were going to come down on her for letting her have an email exchange. She's like, but I knew this guy and he was so good, and I would look at the email every once in a while and just double check, and it was never anything bad.
Well, it's not out of the realm of, history where the victim gets blamed and all that stuff. So she's not wrong, but yeah, you would think immediately you go.
She was crying and she knew that she had made a mistake. And I think she was more upset at the fact that what could have happened if it didn't get caught right away. And then the guilt that she has to live with of not stopping it,
And
it
then
was pretty awful.
And a lot of victims or like parents of victims, they won't come forward because they feel embarrassed.
Right.
They don't want to be known as the bad parent that allowed this to happen to their child.
So it all started with the one woman who sued him. It wasn't sexual. It was more of just sexual harassment. He would ask her for massages, and he would watch porn on his computer and that sort of stuff. But he pushed her out because she had she was writing with another woman who eventually quit, and they were paying them as a duo instead of paying them each individually the amount of money they should be getting paid. So she went to the Writers Guild and she asked the Writers Guild, is it legal for them to pay us as a duo? And the Writers Guild said no, and then launched an investigation into Nickelodeon. And when Nickelodeon got wind of it, he went to him and said, are you trying to betray Nickelodeon? You're trying to betray, because if I find out this was you, and this investigation started because of you, you'll be fired and you'll never work again. And she's like, and that's exactly what happened. She's like, they found a way to get it down to just me, and then eventually I forced me out to quit, so she sued them. But she said she got a little money, and then it was all swept under the table. And her main reason for suing was so that it wouldn't happen to other people, but it just was a vicious cycle.
And that's the other thing. There's such a big network. They have so much money that a lawsuit like that to them, sweep it under the rug, no one hears about it, and
you're done.
And then you're done. And then on top of that, they can keep doing it. And you know what I mean? And there's nothing anyone can do, because now what? They're going to get blacklisted for doing the same thing that you did? They already know that they can get away with it.
So they had Dan Snyder, they had Mr. Pickle, and then they had this Peck guy who was the guy who molested Drake and Drake Bell and some of the other people. I guess we'll find out tonight. So I'm looking forward to watching it, although it is kind of hard to watch. It's very sad. And if you have kids, you want to kill everybody while you're watching it. The entire time I watch it, I'm like, I want to kill all those guys.
And the sad thing is if you guys remember, not too long ago, Drake Bell, he got lost for a while.
Mental breakdown.
He had a mental breakdown and stuff like that. And it almost seems like suspicious timing. You know what I mean? Because this is about to come out. So
Trying
now
to take him out.
Well, take him out, but also you'll question his Jesus, I can't think of the word.
Credibility?
Right now. His credibility. Thank you,
Yeah.
Galvin. You know what I mean? Like, he's gonna go do this show, and at the end of the day, like, you're gonna question his credibility. So Nickelodeon is still protecting their ass.
Yeah, because if you remember when all that stuff happened, I picked up Drake Bell as an emergency pick, and then I picked him for original pick this year because all that stuff, man, that weighs heavy on people for sure.
And you brought up Amanda Bynes. So Dan Snyder did grow very attached to Amanda Bynes at a very young age and created the Amanda Show and all that. And it seemed like they're not saying anything about molestation or anything inappropriate with him yet, but they do show you that the pressure of Amanda Bynes being such a big star at such a young age and why she's nuts now.
And or is there possible molestation there with her? And then you look at her and you go, oh, okay, well that makes sense. That's like all these oh man, it's so weird that all these kid actors wind up being so crazy when they get older. Is it?
Yeah.
Is it weird? Or is there probably a reason?
Well, when you hear Corey Feldman and Corey Haim and Corey Feldman talk about how they were passed around from executive to executive, and then you look at that guy and see how nuts he is, you're like, oh, yeah, I get it.
They're so hell-bent and motivated to being successful that I think they just overlook all that stuff. This is just the cost of doing business if you want to be a famous actor.
Yeah, and think how many bad parents are out there that are like, shh, don't say anything about that. It didn't happen like you said it happened.
Not that bad.
Yeah, because they're getting money because the kid's a star.
You want to be famous or not?
Right.
And I know there was something pointed out about Ariana Grande because she started off as an actress as well. So she was on Victorious and then a spin-off show called Sam and Cat, who Dan Schneider produced that as well, or he was like a part of it. And there was an episode all about feet.
Oh, I remember it. I remember the episode as a parent watching it.
And these little girls, and they're all like having a sleepover, and they're in the bed without socks, and they're all playing with their feet and massaging their feet and putting things on their feet. And like you look at it, and you're like, "Oh, silly kid things. This is what my kid would do." And now knowing that all of these guys are, pedos and
way
creeps.
more sexual references on Sam and Cat than anything. I mean, because that was almost like they tried to make it like an adult.
I remember
show.
you used to say how much you love that show.
It was better. No, because I loved iCarly. When my kids watch iCarly, I was like, all right, I go watch this show because it's filled with silly stuff.
Well, we always we're always making fun of Britney Spears, how she's all crazy.
Oh.
I think there's probably a lot of weird stuff going on.
So
Yeah,
much.
because she started when
Mickey
she was
Mouse
14.
Club and Disney and all that stuff.
Even younger, yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to tonight because tonight is part 2 of the special with Drake getting
Quiet
up there.
on set.
Yep, Quiet on Set's on the ID channel.
Mm.
Now, another show which didn't have quite the sexual molestation issues, but did have other issues was Glee. I was watching this documentary on Glee.
I love Glee.
I loved Glee too, but do you know how many people died from
Yes,
Glee?
I have seen that.
I didn't realize
Overdose.
that. So you had
suicide.
Corey Monteith, who was the who overdosed. Then you had the one girl, the hot girl that I forgot her name now, that went on the lake with her son. and she
Maya
drowned.
something.
Yeah, Maya. And then you had the what was the other one? There was 3 majors. Oh, and then you had the other kid who had thousands and thousands of images of child porn, and he ended up hanging himself when he got caught.
Yeah,
that was the Puck, the bad kid. It's crazy. That's crazy. I don't know.
It says 9 deaths.
Yeah, because those were the 3 stars, but then they had people behind the scenes that were dying.
Yeah,
that was nuts, man.
That was great.
That was totally.
Wait.
I love that show.
It
was a very funny show.
I walked in one time and I went, "What is this?" Not, and an hour later, I was like, "Oh, maybe I'll watch it."
Yeah, it was funny.
Yeah, it was different.
Yeah, I mean, I like cheesy high school type stuff like that.
Sure. And then you mix in the singing and the hot chicks, and you're like, all right, it's a little less gay than I thought it was going to be.